brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs have been breeding. TV sucking ideas from our head. Public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaurs.
Hello, Internet. My name is Eugene Driscoll of ValleyIndy.org. Welcome back to another episode of Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast. Thank you so much to the people who download this local news show each week. As I've said previously, we're now averaging about 2,000 downloads a week, and gosh darn it, that is good for a local news podcast, right? Because I'm boring. My stories are boring, right? You guys hear all that. Whatever. I'll tell you what's not boring is my Facebook page, Valley Indy Facebook right now. Political season is underway. You can read it in the comments. I just had to comment. I don't know why I said comments. I just had to delete a comment where somebody accused another person of drinking too much. Hey, that is life in local politics. Please stop. Be civil. Remember, it's your neighbors. Love one another. Life is too short to insult people. Anyway, this is the third episode in a series I call the CT Invitational. That is when the Valley Indy podcast, to which you are listening, invites the host of other podcasts onto this podcast to talk about their podcast. This week, it's Steve and Cristina of Super Retro Throwback Reviews. He's based in the Mystic, Connecticut area. A lot of water out that way, I believe, in that famous movie with Julia, Eric Roberts' sister. So Stephen will tell you all about his podcast and what he's up to and conventions and things that he's got going on. He's an interesting guy, to say the least, and I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, give his podcast a chance. Go back and listen to the other podcasts that have been featured. Episode 1 was Pint of Comics, great podcast. Episode 2 was Andrew Morgan of the Nomcast, Netflix original movie podcast. Give that one a listen. And I'll shut up right now. And here is Stephen. All right, here we go. On the line with me is Stephen Cristina of the Super Retro Throwback Review podcast. Hello, Stephen. Welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast.
Hello, Eugene. Thank you for having me on, and it's happy to be on the Navel Gazing podcast.
So, Stephen, you do Super Retro Throwback Reviews. I guess we'll start off with the obvious question. What is your podcast about? What's the format? What do we need to know if we're going to tune in to Super Retro Throwback Reviews?
So, Super Retro Throwback Reviews was a brainchild of mine. When I graduated broadcasting school in 2016, I've been doing it. There was something I wanted to do when I got out of broadcasting school, because podcasting was something I learned. And I have such an extensive knowledge of movies, music, and video games. I figured, why not I put that knowledge into a podcast?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I stepped on you. Go ahead.
I started off as a YouTube channel, but now with YouTube's ever-growing algorithm and all their ever-changing policies, I've been focusing on an audio podcast, and I've been doing that more than my YouTube channel. I do have a YouTube channel where I do mobile movie reviews, where I review a movie when I go after I see the movie in the theater, and I review it in my car, and I upload it after, and then I do my 31 Days of Horror. But other than that, I don't do much of the YouTube channel, but I focus on our audio podcast, which is the new and improved Super Retro Throwback Reviews, the Audio Files version 2.0, where me and my co-host, it's basically like a radio show. First 30 minutes are talking about the latest movie, music, and video game news, and then we either do an interview or we talk about random news or something like that. Then we review the latest movie that's in the theater, TV show on Netflix or something like that. And then we do a what the hell is that segment. We do like dumbass news from, all the people that, there are dumb people out there. And we talk about, they're
just stuff you spotted in the news. When did you get a co-host? Because I think you started off, it was just you. When did you get a co-host, and who's the co-host, and how did you hook up with your co-host?
So when I started the audio podcast, I did have a co-host, but she decided to pursue a different project. She does social media and digital marketing. So there was a period of time where I was doing the podcast by myself. So I enlisted my cousin, who, when I do these interviews, he prefers to remain nameless.
Can we call him by a nickname or something? Like on my other podcast, I'm Carlos Danger. Does he go by a pseudonym or anything like that?
No, he doesn't.
I'm going to call him Sam for the purposes of this broadcast.
That's fine. Me and him, we do this together, and we have such a dynamic. We're just basically, we call it in our advisory intro in the beginning, it's basically two jackasses that are two smart asses that talk about witty commentary with pop culture news. It's basically what it is.
And you mentioned at the beginning you went to broadcasting school. Where'd you go to school?
Connecticut School of Broadcasting. It's one of the oldest broadcasting schools in the Eastern Seaboard. There's 12 locations from Boston to Miami, and I went to one of the oldest ones in Farmington, Connecticut.
And you said you took, they taught you podcasting there. What are the types? I'm an old man, right? I'm 45. The internet just came around when I was leaving college in the late 90s. So actually mid-90s. I just tried to shave a few years off my age. But what are some of the things they taught you? Like, how do they teach podcasting in a broadcasting school?
So this, they have, in this facility, they have a radio side and a TV side. So you're learning the radio aspect of the broadcasting industry and the TV aspect of the broadcasting industry. So they have a makeshift TV studio. So you have those big, expensive TV cameras that they use for like WFSB or NBC, and they have the desk with the green screen on the left for the weather and all that stuff. So you're learning all this stuff on the TV side. For the radio side, you have like the disc jockey booth that they have for radio stations and all that stuff. So you're learning all that, but you also have these editing classes, podcasting classes, and all that stuff. And podcasting was just one of the classes that I learned.
That's very cool. I should probably enroll in that. Can I just audit one class? They let you do that? I can't figure out this audio. You know what I mean? It's too complicated. The recording is the technical aspects of recording just slays me.
Well, I do teach podcasting classes, and I'm going to be teaching in a week or so.
Oh yeah, where's that?
New London, Connecticut.
Yeah, where do you live? You don't have to give me your exact address, but where'd you grow up? I know you're a Connecticut guy.
I live in the southeastern Connecticut region. I'm more specifically, I live in the Mystic area.
Okay. And then in terms of every episode that you do, has your podcast, I don't know what that is, but the pod, now I'm totally mispronouncing it. Steven, suddenly I'm tongue-tied and nervous. I don't know what kind of voodoo stuff you're slinging my way, but I'd appreciate it if you stopped it, please. Actually, what's going on? It's Sunday here at my house. I'm recording this in my basement, and obviously Steven is on my computer magically. But upstairs, my son had a sleepover last night. He's got a friend upstairs. They're running around like maniacs. I got a dog with diarrhea. I got to do laundry. There's just too much going on.
I was about to say, hopefully CT Horror Fest isn't getting to you because we're both going to be there.
Well, yeah, that's something I should bring up. Forget what I was going to ask you because my mind went blank a couple of seconds ago. But yeah, coming up the 14th, you're going to. Now you have a table this year. I know I do another podcast about horror movies that is sort of my hobby podcast, as opposed to this one, which is my daytime job. But for my hobby podcast, I was a vendor with my two co-hosts to try to sort of promote our podcast last year at CT Horror Fest. And we had an extraordinary time. It was so much fun. It was really awkward. We had never done something like that before. And people were approaching the table thinking we were like Ethan and Lou from I-95 or Chaz and AJ. Who are you guys? We haven't heard of you. Like, we're literally nobody. But then, you were a guest. We did an episode with you. So you've decided this year you're a vendor, right? Are you even a sponsor this year?
I am. I am a sponsor this year.
Wow, good for you.
I was, see, um, I can mention,
Yeah, you can mention whatever you want. It's fine.
okay. I probably should have mentioned
I
that
mean, you have to
before.
send me like $20 after it's over, but we can
No,
talk
no,
about
no,
that later. Let me
no,
get my legal department involved.
no. I was talking with Larry from Connecticut Classics. They're one of the sponsors for our podcast, and I was at one of the shows. I was talking with Christine, and I was talking about possibly having a booth at this year's CT Horror Fest, and we did there was one of the things where I did the booth. I could have a sponsorship, so it was really cool. And it's the first time I'm sponsoring a convention and having a booth at the same time. September's a big thing for Super Retro Throwback Reviews because not only is that happening for us at CT Horror Fest, but a few weeks after, for the first time in our 3-year history, we're going to be guests at a convention at
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, what's it?
RetroWorld at
Say it again.
RetroWorld at RetroWorld Expo in Hartford, Connecticut.
Oh, wow. So how did that come about?
So I've been supporting this convention, RetroWorld Expo, since the beginning for 5 years, and I'm good friends with the guy who runs it. They run Retro Games Plus, which is 3 stores in Connecticut. It's video game stores. So I've been having a booth there as well for 5 years. Well, since I started the podcast, so it was 3 years, but I've been going like since its inception. Um, I the last year when I had him on the podcast at my booth, he pulled me aside and he said, "Well, I'd like to have you as a guest in my next year, which is this year." And I was blown away because it was something in all the hard work I do on this podcast. I do all the editing, I do all the show notes and all that stuff. My co-host just shows up and we record.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Sam.
yeah, so I pretty much do all the hard work. It's not a 2-man group. It's not a 3-man group. It's not. I mean, really, for my podcast, my audio podcast, it's 2-man group, but really, I'm doing all the work.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back, 3 years doing this, I can't believe I'm going to be a guest.
Yeah, so
It's
what does
really
that
cool.
entail? Like, if I want to go there and shout inappropriate questions, how do I do so?
Just come to the show.
Are you like going to be doing a Q&A? Like how? Like what's the arrangement? What are the logistics of it? What's a guest do at this convention? Because I've never been there.
I'm part of the CT YouTubers panel, which is kind of a final farewell for my YouTube because my YouTube, like I said in the beginning, my YouTube is starting to go downhill because I'm not focusing on that anymore. I'm focusing more on the audio podcast. But being with a bunch of other Connecticut YouTubers on this panel is pretty cool. I'm also going to have my own panel, which I'm very tight-lipped about. I'm not going to say anything about it because I have some things working in my mind. I'm working with the RetroWorld people on
That
it.
sounds dangerous.
What?
You're being tight-lipped about it. I just want to make sure everything's okay. You're not going to pull off something that's kind of.
No.
It's going to be
a
family
fun-
friendly, right? If I bring my son, I'm not going to have him in therapy afterward, right?
No, it's
All right.
fun. It's fun. It's a fun thing. I just don't. I don't want to say anything about it. I don't want to spoil it.
So when is this coming up?
So, RetroWorld Expo is September 28th and 29th at the Connecticut Convention Center. Tickets are already on sale, and they've never sold out a show. It's a big. I'm sure you've been at Connecticut Convention Center, right?
I've only driven by it. I worked briefly. I worked for 7 months at the Current, and I would drive by that place every day.
Yeah, it's a big place.
That's
They
awesome.
have-
I might check it out because that sounds like something I could bring my kid to and have a ball.
Yeah, they have live bands. They have free play games. They have tournaments, Fortnite tournaments, Tetris tournament. They're having a Temco Bowl tournament. There's a CT Temco Bowl group, and they're doing a Temco Bowl tournament for all you NES game players out there. It's really cool.
Oh wow, that's fast. And a Fortnite tournament. See, I've been playing a lot of Fortnite. I'm terrible. but my kid plays it a lot with his other fourth grade friends. It's a pretty wild game. So you got a lot going on, and then you won a couple of awards, or at least nominated for a couple of awards recently.
Yes, yes. So I've, along with our podcast and any podcast, there are always podcast awards. We have been nominated for awards this year alone, and it's like a total of 6 awards, I believe. I'm looking at them right now. Our local newspaper, The Day in New London, they have a Best of Reader's Choice 2019, and they have a arts and entertainment section, and it's local radio/podcast host. In the finals, I was the only podcast in New London County that made the top 5. I did not make the top 3. The winners, top 3 winners, but I was the only one that made the final 5. For podcast awards, that's the People's Choice. That's like the big one next to Webby. We were nominated for the Adam Curry People's Choice Award and TV and Film. And there's a horror convention in Massachusetts called Scaricon every June, which for you guys at your horror podcast, that's one you definitely should check out. Best Interview Award, and we got the Honorable Mention Award.
And then what about, like, I when we were arranging this interview, I'm sort of fascinated by this. Maybe it's too inside baseball, but the whole purpose of the CT Invitational Series that I'm doing at the Valley Indy is to sort of get inside baseball with other Connecticut podcasters and hopefully expose them to a new audience, because we don't have a ton of local podcasts. It's basically the Valley Indy, and then there's 2 dudes talking Disney in the lower Naugatuck Valley. But anyway, so when we were arranging this interview for you to come on to talk about Super Retro Throwback Reviews, you talked about you had like a podcast network meeting earlier today. Like, what's your network, and how did you get into something like that? I'm fascinated by that type of stuff.
I was originally part of a podcast group in Connecticut. Let's just say things didn't work out in this podcast group. That's the friendliest way I'm going to say it.
Okay.
But I joined a network media group a while back called Clovercrest Media Group, but they were things weren't going the way I wanted with this group, and they were, from a business standpoint, it wasn't something I wanted. So there's I have a good friend who runs a podcast network, someone I trust, and it's called the Darkening Podcast Network.
Oh, sure. Okay, I've heard of them.
Yeah. So I'm part of that network, and I'm very satisfied with being a part of this network.
And what are the other podcasts in the network? And the Darkening, they're another Connecticut-based podcast?
Yeah, they're based right around in my area. But we have other podcasts that are like in Massachusetts and, just all around New England, We have shows. Darkening has like 3 shows. They have Dorks the Podcast, which is their Sunday show, which I was just on. Like, I thought I was going to be late doing this interview, but I wasn't. They have their Wicked Horror Show, which is like a horror-themed show every Tuesday. And then they have their Splash Pages comic book show, which talks straight comics. And also that's under the Darkening umbrella. But for other shows on the network, we have that Strange Show. We have 3 Guys at Horror. We have the Loose Cannon podcast with Jeremy Courtney. We have, I'm drawing a blank here.
Well, that's all right. Now, the Darkening, though, like, I've come across them on Facebook. Are they primarily, because they have a pretty thriving video service, or are they on YouTube? Or they do Facebook Live, or are they primarily like an iTunes traditional podcast?
So it's all of the above.
Wow, those guys are busy. Yeah, and it's like good production and all that. I mean, I'm in my basement next to like an asbestos-laden cabinet. Those guys got it going on.
Yeah. So I'm very satisfied. I'm very happy being a part of this. This is, again, back to the RetroWorld Expo. For years, I've been wanting to be a guest at a convention. For years, I've always wanted to be a part of a network. And now I'm a guest at a convention. Now I'm part of a network. So I'm very happy. I'm very satisfied. All the people all the podcasts I've met, all the friends I've made over the years, I'm at a great place with this podcast, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Sweet. All right, Stephen, and we will see each other Saturday, September 14th at the Naugatuck Event Center during CT Horror Fest. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Everybody check out Stephen Christina's podcast. And for Stephen and the Valley Indy, this is Eugene Driscoll signing off, and we'll talk again next week, I hope.
For hundreds of years we brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs have been breeding. TV sucking ideas from our head. Public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur. Our readers are in the opens each day. Online clickbait a prurient way. It's free information here to stay. Not even hookers give it away. Advertising, metastasizing, newsroom shrinking, constant attrition. We'll ride the dinosaur. We'll ride the dinosaur. Dinosaur. Deadlines, bylines, pictures too. An editorial comment for a buck or two. Fire down the block, the murder next door. And now we wonder what it's all for. Social media coming free to you, funny pages, the mayor's wages, criminal seats, corruption schemes, ink state wretches asking tough questions. We'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur. The presses are running all through the night. We're printing the truth with all of our might. We're platform agnostics, got that interweb too. Buy an ad, see what we can do. We still have subscribers, still have our fans. We're here every day, so give us a chance or we'll make an art stand. Just hold us in your hand and we'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur.
you.